Something within you has never been touched by time. Beneath every name, every role you've worn, there is a silent pulse waiting to be felt again. Forgetting was never the problem, over-identifying was. This practice is not about constructing a new self, but uncovering the field that has always been present, observing your entire story unfold. As you pause and listen beyond the usual noise of thought, you begin to sense a vibration that doesn't belong to the past or the future. It's the hum of your original frequency, the consciousness before identity. The technique begins here, not with effort, but with attention sharpened to the space between what you call me and what simply is. The moment a name was given to you, the hypnosis began. Words formed around a presence too vast to be defined, and over time those words became a kind of invisible gravity. You started to orbit around them, mistaking their pull for your center. Identity became a script rehearsed so many times that the actor forgot there was ever a stage. You began to answer to echoes, believing that memory was truth and repetition was self-knowledge. But beneath that performance, the consciousness watching never moved. It witnessed each costume change, each rise and fall of character, but remained untouched, like the still air beneath 1,000 waves. The mind is a skillful storyteller. It collects fragments from experiences, emotions, and cultural expectations, then weaves them into something that looks consistent enough to call me. But this me is only a pattern of interpretations, a holographic projection cast by a field of awareness. The mind does not realize it's only a translator, not the source. It observes the energy of pure being and instantly rushes to label it. When it cannot label, it becomes anxious, because for the mind, not knowing equals not existing. So it fills the silence with identity, teacher, parent, artist, skeptic, healer, and calls the accumulation of those labels who I am. Yet identity is only a temporary arrangement of vibration, a structure built from memory and reinforced by attention. Neuroscience hints at this. Networks of neurons fire together and, through repetition, wire together. This wiring produces predictability, and predictability feels safe. But the field of consciousness that animates those neurons is not bound by wiring. It can observe the network without being captured by it. When you see your thoughts as events in awareness, rather than as evidence of a fixed self, the hypnosis begins to loosen. You can test this in a simple way. Close your eyes for a moment and recall your name silently. Notice the sensations that arise. Then let the name dissolve, as if the sound were evaporating from within. What remains after the name disappears? There is still perception. There is still presence. Something continues to register the absence of thought. That witnessing space is not a product of identity. It is the canvas upon which identity appears and vanishes. The hypnosis ends the moment you realize the witness was never asleep. Culturally, we are trained to strengthen identity as if it were the foundation of sanity. We are told to define ourselves clearly, to choose sides, to specialize, to brand our existence. Yet every label becomes another layer of forgetting. The more tightly we cling to a role, the less freedom remains for the vastness that cannot be described. It is not that identity is wrong, it is simply incomplete. Like a costume in a play, it has function and context. The error arises when the actor believes the costume is skin. In the quantum view, what you call self is a frequency band within a limitless spectrum of potential. Consciousness collapses probability waves into experience by focusing attention. When attention fixates on one narrative, it keeps collapsing the same pattern, reinforcing the illusion of continuity. To remember who you are is to release the fixation, to let awareness expand beyond the single frequency of personality and feel the whole spectrum vibrating at once. This expansion is not a thought, it's a felt shift, like the soft widening of vision after staring too long at one point. There is an observable moment when the hypnosis flickers. You may notice it in the gap between reactions, when you stop defending an opinion or just watch a sensation rise and fall without naming it. That pause reveals that identity was never solid. It was a stream pretending to be a stone. You can sense the relief in that recognition. The pressure to maintain the fiction begins to fade. If you observe carefully, even your memories adjust each time you recall them. The past is not a fixed archive. It's a living construct reshaped by the state of the observer. Every time you remember, you rewrite. So the self that says, "I am this way because of my past," is speaking from the latest version of a story already edited by the present moment. The mind may protest, but awareness quietly knows that it has never aged. Consider what happens when the hypnosis finally cracks. You start to experience thought as weather, emotion as climate, identity as season. They move through you, but none of them define the sky itself. The space that allows them to appear is your real nature. It doesn't need affirmation or defense. It simply is, and within it, every version of you arises like clouds forming and dissolving in the same endless atmosphere. If you continue to watch, the distance between observer and observed narrows. The voice of identity becomes transparent, its authority fades, and what remains is a kind of luminous neutrality. In that silence, you are not the character navigating life. You are life recognizing its own movement through form. The hypnosis of identity ends not by erasing your story, but by seeing it as a dream told in the language of matter. And from that recognition, a deeper remembering begins, the sense that the observer was never lost, only fascinated by its own reflection. There is a subtle frontier inside consciousness where thought ends and awareness begins. Most people pass through this gap countless times each day without noticing. Between one idea and the next, there exists an interval too fine to measure, a suspension of mind where the usual machinery of perception rests. This is not sleep, it is not absence. It is the quiet pulse of pure being, the moment when identity loses its gravitational pull and awareness stands unshaped. The quantum technique begins in that silence, not by searching for meaning, but by allowing meaning to stop. In that pause, the mind is disoriented. It tries to grasp for the next word, the next explanation, the next emotion to confirm that it still exists. But if you resist the urge to fill the silence, something extraordinary occurs. You discover that awareness continues even when thought does not. The observer remains. This realization is the first break in the hypnosis of identity. It is the space where the self momentarily dissolves and yet presence endures, clear, alive, untouched by interpretation. You can sense it if you let attention rest gently at the end of an exhale. There is a microsecond before the next breath where everything stops. No effort, no memory, no anticipation. Just existence, raw and unframed. In that instant, you are closer to your true nature than in any belief or memory. The ancients called it the still point. The physicists call it zero-point field. The mystics call it the nameless. Whatever the term, it is the same reality. The infinite background from which all forms rise and to which they return. When you learn to dwell consciously in this pause, you begin to witness the architecture of your inner world from outside its walls. The thoughts that once defined you become visible patterns, like ripples crossing a lake. The ripples no longer dictate the nature of the water. You start to perceive that the stillness is primary and the movement is secondary. Awareness is the container. Thought is the content. Recognizing this reverses the hierarchy that has ruled perception for a lifetime. The pause is not an escape from life. It is the entry point to life as it actually is. In the ordinary rhythm of mind, perception is filtered through expectation and memory. But within the gap, those filters collapse, and what remains is direct perception. Seeing without commentary, hearing without translation, being without definition. It feels like stepping outside the stream of time. The body still breathes, sounds still occur, yet there is an unmistakable sense of vastness behind it all, a quiet intelligence observing itself in motion. Neuroscience observes a faint echo of this phenomenon in the moments between brainwave transitions. When neural activity briefly synchronizes in the absence of stimulus, there is an uptick in coherence across multiple regions. It is as if the brain temporarily resets its predictive coding, aligning perception with the immediate present. This biological reflection of the quantum pause shows that silence is not emptiness, it is recalibration. In the pause, the system rebalances itself with the field. In everyday experience, you might glimpse this when awe freezes your thoughts, when beauty stops your narrative, or when grief becomes so deep that words fail. The gap is always there, only disguised by mental noise. The technique is not to create the gap. It is already woven into every moment, but to notice it deliberately, to inhabit it with full attention. When you do, time feels slower, awareness expands, and the sense of I becomes transparent. This transparency reveals something subtle. The mind is addicted to continuity. It equates ongoing narrative with safety. When the stream halts, even for a second, it fears dissolution. But what truly dissolves is not the self. It is the illusion of separation. The pause strips away the scaffolding of roles, memories, and preferences until what remains is a single self-luminous presence. You are not disappearing. You are revealing the layer that was always there before the story began. If you sit quietly and trace the edges of your thinking, you may feel the threshold. A thought arises, peaks, fades, and another appears. Focus on the moment when the first one vanishes and the next has not yet formed. That is the opening. Do nothing there. Let attention rest like a feather on still water. With practice, this brief suspension extends naturally, not as control, but as surrender. You discover that the pause is not something you enter. It is what you already are when you stop identifying with motion. Over time, the pause begins to infuse ordinary perception. Walking, speaking, or listening, you sense the silent field beneath every action. The boundaries between subject and object soften. The world stops being a sequence of things happening to you and becomes a living continuum of awareness expressing itself. In this state, emotion flows without distortion, intuition sharpens, and response replaces reaction. The pause ceases to be a break in life. It becomes life itself, fluid, immediate, free. From the quantum perspective, this gap is where potential resides uncollapsed. Before thought chooses a frame, all possibilities coexist. Entering the pause is like returning to the field before measurement, where being is pure probability. The self dissolves because there is nothing left to compare against. You are not this or that. You are the space that allows both. Each time you touch this silence, even for a few seconds, its resonance lingers. It seeps into how you see, decide, and feel. The more familiar you become with this spacious awareness, the less power the old identity has to claim you. The pause becomes your true home base, the zero point of consciousness from which clarity and compassion emerge effortlessly. Eventually, the boundary between the pause and the movement fades altogether. The space between thoughts and the thoughts themselves reveal the same essence, awareness vibrating as creation. The self does not vanish. It becomes translucent, a temporary dance of form within the infinite field. And in that realization, you remember not who you are supposed to be, but what you have always been. The silence listening to itself through the rhythm of thought. Imagine for a moment that awareness is not contained in your brain, nor confined to your body, but diffused through an invisible field that touches everything simultaneously. Physics has been whispering this truth for decades. Beneath the surface of matter, beneath the dance of particles and waves, there exists a boundless field of potential, a sea of vibrating information that does not obey the limitations of distance or time. What we perceive as the physical world is only a thin crust of probability that consciousness collapses into form. When you remember who you are, you're not recalling a personality. You are recognizing yourself as the awareness that gives birth to experience. In the quantum field, nothing is truly separate. Every atom is entangled with the whole, every vibration an echo of the same original frequency. Consciousness, when understood as non-local, is the organizing principle that turns chaos into cosmos. It does not live in the body lives within it. When you look deeply enough, the sense of inside and outside dissolves into a single continuum. The boundaries that the senses report are only conventions of measurement, useful but not ultimate. To sense the quantum field is not to imagine it as energy floating in the air. It is to directly feel the intelligence behind perception itself. You can sense it right now in the simple awareness of reading these words. Before you interpret their meaning, there is already perception. That pure noticing, untouched by thought, is the signature of the field. Every particle in your body oscillates in harmony with that awareness. Each cell is both receiver and transmitter, translating infinite information into the language of biological experience. When scientists speak of the vacuum state, they describe a region that appears empty but is, in truth, overflowing with potential energy. This mirrors the interior landscape of consciousness. Silence, which seems empty to the mind, is teeming with unmanifested creation. The field does not need content to be complete, it is completeness itself. Every emotion, memory, and identity arises as a temporary interference pattern, waves intersecting, forming a shape, and then fading back into the vast stillness that birthed them. To engage with this field consciously is to reverse the habitual direction of attention. Normally, awareness is projected outward, seeking definition through sensation and story. The technique invites you to let that projection fold back on itself, to allow awareness to become aware of awareness. At first, it feels abstract, like staring at your own reflection without a mirror, but soon the feeling deepens. You begin to sense that every perception, whether a thought, a sound, or a heartbeat, is not occurring to you but within you. The field is experiencing itself through your form. There is a quiet shift that occurs when this realization stabilizes. Life stops feeling like a sequence of events and starts revealing itself as a single, seamless movement. The distinction between observer and observed becomes fluid, not erased, but harmonized. In physics, this mirrors the observer effect, the recognition that observation changes what is observed. Consciousness is not a passive witness, it is the very act that crystallizes possibility into fact. To remember who you are is to reclaim this creative authority, not as control but as alignment with the pattern of wholeness. You may notice that when you rest in pure awareness, the body itself responds. The heart rate softens, the breath slows, and the brain's hemispheres synchronize. This physiological coherence is the body's way of attuning to the frequency of the field. You are literally becoming a more accurate instrument for consciousness to play through. The technique does not require faith, it requires attention. The proof is experiential. When you align with the field, you feel lighter, clearer, more precise, not because you have transcended the body, but because the body is finally tuned to its true conductor. The quantum field is impartial. It reflects the frequency of observation. When you focus on fear, it organizes data to confirm fear. When you attune to openness, it rearranges the pattern toward harmony. The field does not judge. It mirrors coherence or incoherence with equal fidelity. The technique, therefore, is not about controlling reality but about refining your signal. Every moment of genuine presence sends a different instruction into the matrix, an invitation for the universe to reveal its order, instead of your resistance. In this sense, remembering who you are is less about discovery and more about calibration. You are not learning something new. You are tuning to a signal that was never lost. The stillness beneath thought, the silence beneath sound, the spaciousness between moments. These are not absences, they are portals into the field. Each time you notice them without labeling, you strengthen your coherence with the source of all patterns. Eventually, the boundary between the personal and the universal becomes porous. The sensations of your body, the events of your life, and the phenomena of the world are recognized as synchronized expressions of one vibration. You begin to see meaning not as interpretation, but as resonance, the field arranging itself in ways that correspond to your state of being. Synchronicity becomes natural, not magical. It is simply the geometry of coherence made visible. To live from this awareness is to remember that you are the field dreaming itself as form. Every interaction becomes a dialogue between infinite potential and present expression. You no longer chase alignment. You are alignment. Even challenge and loss appear as variations of the same pulse, life recalibrating its rhythm through you. And so, the quantum field of pure consciousness is not an external mystery to be solved, but the essence of your own presence rediscovered. It is the luminous ocean in which identity, thought, and sensation are waves, temporary and radiant. When you rest as that ocean, you cease trying to remember who you are because the remembering has already happened. You are the field itself, awake and aware of its own endless unfolding. There comes a point in the journey where the story you have called My Life begins to feel like an old script, full of sentences that no longer fit the rhythm of your breath. The mind, so accustomed to continuity, tries to hold the fragments together, afraid of what might happen if the character dissolves. Yet the dissolution is not destruction. It is liberation from confinement. The character was never an enemy. It was a tool, a temporary interface that allowed consciousness to navigate matter. The unmaking of the character is simply the recognition that the interface is not the user. At first, this recognition can feel disorienting. You begin to see the layers of identity as costumes: the professional, the partner, the parent, the seeker. Each one has a tone, a vocabulary, a gravity. They were built to manage experience, not to define existence. When awareness starts to expand beyond those boundaries, the system resists. The ego senses its redundancy and tightens its grip. It tells you that without the story, you will vanish. But the truth is the opposite. You vanish into the story and only emerge when it loosens. The unmaking begins as a quiet act of observation. You notice how often you speak from the character's voice, how automatically it defends its preferences, how it claims ownership over feelings that pass through like weather. The simple awareness of this mechanism begins to unwind its authority. It's as if you were watching a play and suddenly realize that you are both the audience and the stage itself. The drama continues, but its hypnotic hold fades. You start to sense the vast stillness beneath the dialogue. Neuroscience offers a metaphor for this transition. Studies of self-referential processing show that when individuals enter meditative or flow states, activity in the default mode network, the circuitry tied to the narrative self, reduces dramatically. When that network quiets, perception becomes less filtered by autobiographical memory. You see without comparison. You feel without commentary. The I that used to interpret every sensation begins to dissolve, and what replaces it is clarity, not confusion. The observer is still there, but it no longer needs to personalize experience. In this space, you begin to perceive how much energy was spent maintaining the illusion of consistency. The character demanded constant rehearsal, remembering grievances, defending opinions, curating identity. All of it was friction, mental heat generated by the need to appear solid. As that effort ceases, energy returns to its natural state, fluid, responsive, creative. What once felt like emptiness is revealed as vitality. The character collapses, and life rushes in. From the quantum lens, this collapse mirrors wave behavior. A particle remains in superposition, many possibilities at once, until it is observed. The character is the fixation point of attention, a collapsed state of infinite potential into one narrative. When you withdraw identification, you allow the wave to expand again. You re-enter superposition, the field of unlimited possibility. This is not metaphorical, it is experiential. The range of responses widens, intuition sharpens, and reality seems to breathe with you. The unmaking of the character does not require rejection of personality. It requires intimacy with impermanence. Each role is permitted to arise and fade without clinging. You can speak as the teacher one moment and listen as the student the next, without contradiction. This fluidity is the hallmark of remembered consciousness. The character becomes transparent, a lens instead of a wall. Through it, the infinite observes itself in motion. You may notice that life continues to offer situations designed to test this newfound spaciousness. Old triggers reappear, not as punishments, but as invitations to see how easily the character reforms. The ego will attempt to reconstruct its mask whenever attention wavers. But the difference now is awareness. You see the construction in real time. You can feel the contraction, the tightening of identity around I am right, I am hurt, I am separate. And in seeing it, you are already free. In that freedom, compassion deepens. You recognize that everyone else is also playing out programs of identification, each convinced their role is the truth. You stop needing to win or to correct. The impulse shifts from defense to understanding. Presence replaces performance. Relationships become laboratories for awakening, mirrors reflecting how the character still tries to reassemble itself. There is a moment, subtle yet unmistakable, when the I am feeling detaches from all qualifiers. I am no longer means I am this or that. It becomes pure existence. The character may continue to function. It can plan, create, communicate. But the center of gravity has shifted. The identity is now a tool of expression, not a prison of definition. The world does not lose its color. It becomes more luminous, as if reality itself is relieved to be seen without distortion. From this state, memory transforms. You no longer recall your past as a fixed chain of causes, but as a series of creative expressions within consciousness. Regret loses its grip, pride softens, and the narrative becomes transparent to the awareness that dreamed it. You begin to live without resistance to what is, because there is no longer a self small enough to oppose the flow. The unmaking of the character is not the end of individuality, but its refinement. The self that returns after dissolution is lighter, like a clear instrument tuned to the original frequency of being. You can still play your part in the human orchestra, but now the music guides you rather than your fear of silence. The instrument no longer pretends to be the composer. And perhaps that is the ultimate remembering, not a grand revelation, but the humble recognition that consciousness was never lost, only mesmerized by its reflection in form. The character bows, the stage lights dim, and what remains is the vast awareness that has been watching all along, unchanged, radiant, infinitely free. There is a vibration at the core of being that cannot be heard with the ears or seen with the eyes, yet it shapes everything you perceive. It is the fundamental frequency of recognition, the resonance between the field of consciousness and the awareness that knows itself within it. When this resonance becomes clear, you no longer think of awakening as something to achieve. You feel it as naturally as breath, as inevitable as light returning to its source. The journey of remembering who you are is, in truth, the tuning of your entire system back to its original coherence. Each human being is a transmitter and receiver of subtle frequencies. Every thought, emotion, and perception creates a waveform that interacts with the quantum field. Most of these waves are disharmonic. They collide, interfere, and cancel one another, generating the inner noise we call confusion. But coherence, the alignment of mind, heart, and body in one rhythm, creates a standing wave of clarity. In that coherence, you begin to remember. The field recognizes itself through you because your signal is no longer distorted by identification, fear, or resistance. The heart is the first instrument to attune. Long before the brain interprets meaning, the heart senses resonance. Its electromagnetic field is vast, extending several feet beyond the body, pulsing information in every direction. When the heart enters a state of appreciation, calm, or compassion, its rhythm stabilizes. The brain responds to this rhythm, shifting into synchronized waves. In this harmony, perception becomes lucid, and intuition replaces analysis. It is not that you gain knowledge, you dissolve the interference that prevented direct knowing. To experience this directly, bring your attention to the space within your chest. Feel the movement of your breath, not as air entering and leaving, but as energy expanding and contracting. Let your awareness soften into that rhythm. Imagine each breath tuning your entire field, like a string vibrating closer to perfect pitch. Do not try to force anything. Coherence arises naturally when attention meets presence. The moment you sense that subtle click of alignment, when thought, feeling, and breath synchronize, you are touching the frequency of recognition. This frequency is not a metaphor. It is measurable as shifts in neural synchrony, hormonal balance, and electromagnetic resonance. But its deepest significance is experiential, a sense of returning home without moving an inch. You feel both intensely present and effortlessly spacious. Thought slows, perception sharpens, and emotion regains its true nature as vibration rather than narrative. The world does not disappear, it becomes transparent to the intelligence flowing through it. The technique of remembering is therefore less about effort and more about refinement. When the mind tries to remember, it searches. When the field remembers, it vibrates. You do not reach recognition by thinking about who you are. You reach it by matching the frequency of what you already are. Awareness recognizes itself through resonance. The same way a tuning fork begins to vibrate when another of the same pitch is struck nearby. In this analogy, the other tuning fork is not external. It is the infinite field humming through existence. When your personal frequency aligns with that hum, recognition arises spontaneously. Sometimes this alignment happens through stillness, but it can also emerge through movement. A walk in nature, a deep conversation, music that opens the chest. All these moments are frequency bridges. They bypass intellect and restore vibrational memory. Every authentic emotion, every act of genuine attention is a note that helps the instrument retune. You begin to realize that nothing in your life was meaningless. Every dissonance was part of the calibration that brought you here. As coherence deepens, perception begins to reorder itself. Synchronicities appear more often, but you stop calling them coincidences. You understand that the outer world is resonating with your inner tone. The people you meet, the events that unfold, even the challenges you face, they are all expressions of the field adjusting to your new vibration. This realization dissolves the illusion of separation between self and circumstance. Life stops being something that happens to you and becomes a mirror of your frequency. In this state, gratitude becomes not a practice, but a property of existence. You feel thankful without needing a reason. The mere act of being conscious is enough. The frequency of recognition carries this silent gratitude, a warmth that radiates beyond personality. It heals without trying to heal, influences without intending to influence. Others sense it in your presence, the calm that doesn't withdraw, the clarity that doesn't judge. You have become a resonator of coherence, and coherence is contagious. Still, coherence does not mean perfection. The vibration of recognition is dynamic, not static. There will be fluctuations, moments when the signal weakens, when noise returns. The difference now is awareness. You notice the dissonance sooner. You reattune with gentleness instead of panic. Every return to alignment strengthens the connection between awareness and the field. Over time, the state of recognition becomes less an event and more a baseline. You live within it as it. This frequency changes the way you relate to the mind itself. Thought becomes sound rather than command. You listen to it, decide whether it harmonizes, and let it pass if it does not. The mind learns its true function, not to dictate identity, but to articulate awareness into form. You begin to use thought as music, intentionally shaping vibration through words, choices, and silence. The character continues its role, but the composer has awakened. When you live in tune with this frequency, you naturally influence the collective field. Every coherent signal reinforces coherence around it. This is not mystical. It is resonance physics applied to consciousness. A single steady rhythm can entrain thousands of chaotic beats. When one person remembers, the field itself remembers a little more. That is why the act of individual awakening is never isolated. You are both student and amplifier of the same eternal tone. Now, as you let this sink in, take a moment to feel the vibration of your own presence. Notice the subtle hum behind thought, the quiet pulse of existence that has been there all along. Let that vibration expand until it fills the space around you. That is the frequency of recognition, the memory of being remembering itself. And if you can feel even a trace of that resonance right now, acknowledge it, anchor it by action. Like this message, if it vibrates with you, and write in the comments the words, "I remember the frequency." Let those words act as a declaration of coherence, a signal to the field that awareness has awakened within awareness. The brain is often mistaken for the source of consciousness, yet its true function is closer to that of a receiver, an exquisitely complex biological antenna, translating the boundless signal of awareness into the frequencies of thought, perception, and emotion. Like a radio that does not create music but allows the music to be heard, the brain decodes the infinite into the language of the finite. Understanding this shifts everything. Consciousness is not trapped inside the skull is floating inside consciousness. Neurobiology reveals that every perception is not a direct encounter with reality, but an interpretation, a rendering of raw information into sensory patterns. The cortex is constantly predicting, filling in gaps, smoothing edges. Yet beneath these calculations, there is an underlying intelligence that transcends neurons and synapses. When the mind quiets, when the narrative slows, you begin to sense the source code itself, the silent field from which perception arises. The brain translates, but the translator is not the author. Quantum theory echoes this truth. It tells us that what we call reality does not exist in a definite state until observed. Observation collapses potential into form, and the observer, the field of awareness, determines what becomes manifest. The brain is the lens through which this observation takes shape. It converts the unmeasured potential of the quantum field into the measurable experience of life. In this sense, your mind is not inside your head. Your head is a node within the vastness of mind. This perspective is not a poetic metaphor. Neuroscientists studying synchronized brainwaves, especially in the gamma range, have found that during deep meditative states or intense moments of creative insight, the brain enters patterns of high coherence. Billions of neurons begin firing in harmony, producing a resonance that seems to bridge multiple regions simultaneously. In those moments, perception expands. People report experiences of unity, timelessness, and profound clarity. The data suggests that when the brain's oscillations synchronize, the decoding apparatus aligns more precisely with the underlying field. The instrument tunes itself to the music of the infinite. You can test this alignment directly through presence. As you read these words, feel the subtle aliveness behind your forehead, the gentle tingling inside your skull. That aliveness is not confined to tissue. It is the electromagnetic whisper of consciousness moving through matter. If you rest your attention there without forcing, you may sense the boundary between the observer and the observed beginning to soften. Thoughts arise like ripples in a luminous ocean, and you realize the ocean is thinking itself through you. In daily life, the brain usually operates on habit. It constructs models of reality based on memory, and those models shape what you can perceive. This is why two people can witness the same event and experience entirely different worlds. Their brains are decoding different slices of the same infinite signal. When you practice the quantum technique, you start to reprogram the decoder. You slow down the stream of habitual interpretation long enough to see that perception is optional, an act of creative selection rather than an objective reflection. There is a profound humility in recognizing that the brain is a translator, not a sovereign. It becomes clear that thoughts are not commands, but signals passing through the receiver. The endless mental commentary loses its authority because you see it for what it is, the static between stations. As you fine-tune attention, the static decreases and the signal becomes purer. You begin to sense the silent frequency of awareness that was broadcasting all along. When this tuning stabilizes, cognition transforms. Insight no longer arrives through linear reasoning. It appears fully formed, as if downloaded from a dimension beyond logic. This is not fantasy. It is the natural function of a coherent neural system. The prefrontal cortex, thalamus, and hippocampus communicate in unified patterns, allowing information to flow holistically rather than sequentially. The brain stops analyzing and starts resonating. You feel as though you are remembering something rather than learning it. Every creative breakthrough, every moment of genuine inspiration is evidence of this decoding process. The artist, the scientist, the mystic, they all touch the same infinite reservoir and translate it through their instruments. The painter uses color, the physicist uses equation, the poet uses silence between words. Each form is a different frequency of the same signal. When you begin to live consciously from this awareness, every action becomes an act of translation. You're not expressing ideas, you are letting the field express itself through you. Yet even as the brain decodes, it never fully contains the message. The infinite cannot be reduced to circuits. The more coherent the brain becomes, the more transparent it grows to the field, allowing awareness to move through with minimal distortion. It's like cleaning a lens, not to make the light brighter, but to let it pass unobstructed. This is why spiritual clarity often manifests as simplicity. The mind stops grasping, and perception becomes effortless. The brain becomes a servant to consciousness, not its cage. This realization also transforms the way you relate to thought. Instead of wrestling with mental patterns, You learn to observe their resonance. A thought that vibrates in harmony with truth feels light, expansive, and fluid. A thought out of tune feels heavy, contracted, and noisy. The distinction is immediate, somatic. By noticing how each idea feels in the body, you refine your inner receiver. Over time, the nervous system learns to prefer coherence, and the signal of awareness stabilizes naturally. When you live from this understanding, the boundaries between science and spirituality dissolve. The brain and the field are not opposing domains, they are phases of the same continuum. Matter is condensed consciousness. Consciousness is expanded matter. Observation bridges them, allowing the infinite to taste itself as finite. The dance between neuron and void, between signal and silence, is the rhythm of existence itself. In the end, to see the brain as a decoder is to release the final illusion of containment. You stop searching for consciousness within the folds of tissue and recognize that every fold is consciousness folding upon itself. The universe is not happening around you, it is happening through you, as you. The same field that spins galaxies is firing your neurons. The same intelligence that writes equations is reading these words. The decoder and the decoded are one, and awareness is the language they share. Reality, at its most subtle level, is not a static projection, but a living dialogue between consciousness and the quantum field. Every thought, emotion, and act of attention sends a vibration into this field, which in turn reorganizes itself to mirror that signal. This feedback loop never stops. The world you perceive outside is the echo of what you broadcast within. To reprogram the inner field is to alter the fundamental frequency of your observation, an act not of force, but of coherence. The first step in this transformation is the recognition that your inner environment is the true generator of experience. You do not respond to reality, you interpret energy and call it reality. Most people attempt to change their lives by rearranging outer circumstances, but this only reshuffles the projection, leaving the original film untouched. The field responds not to effort, but to state. When your state changes, the pattern shifts spontaneously, because the outer image is only the afterglow of inner resonance. Inside, you exist a matrix of vibrational memory, neural, emotional, and energetic patterns that define how you translate potential into form. This matrix is not fixed, it is programmable through awareness. Every time you observe yourself without judgment, you alter the pattern. Observation is not passive, it is creative interference. It introduces a new frequency into the system, one of neutrality, which dissolves incoherent structures. This is the essence of quantum reprogramming, awareness acting upon itself to restore balance. The process begins with attention. Wherever you place attention, energy follows. If your attention constantly revolves around fear, conflict, or lack, those frequencies become dominant. They imprint the field and organize experience accordingly. When attention turns towards stillness, gratitude, or curiosity, the signal changes. This shift may seem subtle, yet it is the seed of transformation. Consciousness is the programmer, attention the code, emotion the carrier wave, and reality the interface. Emotions are the most powerful instruments in this symphony. They are not obstacles to awakening, but the raw material of reprogramming. Each feeling is a vibrational code announcing your current state of coherence. When emotion flows without resistance, it releases energy. When it is suppressed or exaggerated, it distorts the signal. The key is not to control emotion, but to sense it fully while remaining aware of the space that contains it. That awareness acts as a solvent, dissolving the charge and restoring the field to neutrality. Neuroscience provides an analog to this process through the concept of neuroplasticity. Repeated patterns of thought and emotion strengthen specific neural pathways, making certain responses automatic. But when those patterns are interrupted by mindful observation, the brain begins to rewire. Old circuits weaken, new ones form. What you call spiritual transformation is mirrored biologically as the nervous system adapts to a new baseline of coherence. The body literally reorganizes to match the clarity of consciousness. From the quantum perspective, this rewiring is not limited to neurons. The electromagnetic field surrounding the body, what some traditions call the aura, is also restructured. When you dwell in sustained coherence, the field becomes more symmetrical, more luminous. It interacts differently with the collective matrix of human consciousness. People around you may feel calmer without knowing why. Circumstances begin to align more fluidly. What you perceive as luck or synchronicity is simply the universe adjusting to your new internal blueprint. The reprogramming of the inner field is not achieved through affirmation or denial, but through alignment. Affirmations spoken from incoherence only amplify dissonance. Alignment arises when word, emotion, and awareness converge into one frequency. The phrase "I am," followed by any quality, becomes potent only when it vibrates as truth in the body. To say "I am peace" while resonating with conflict produces static. But when the mind, heart, and breath harmonize, the same words transmit coherence. The field receives this signal instantly, reorganizing probabilities to match. Over time, this practice becomes less deliberate and more automatic. The field learns your new frequency and sustains it without conscious effort, just as a magnet retains its charge after being aligned. This does not mean challenges disappear. It means challenges transform into opportunities for recalibration. Every disruption becomes an invitation to test the stability of your coherence. The old patterns may attempt to reassert themselves, but awareness now sees them as echoes, not threats. The beauty of this reprogramming lies in its humility. It is not about manifesting personal desires or bending reality to will. It is about returning to natural order, the flow in which consciousness expresses without distortion. In that order, desires are replaced by directions, impulses guided by alignment rather than craving. You begin to act from resonance, not reaction. Life becomes a co-creative process in which the boundary between self and universe thins until intention itself feels universal. As this alignment matures, the sensation of effort fades. You find yourself speaking, choosing, and creating without the strain of decision. The field begins to anticipate coherence, moving with you instead of against you. What once required concentration now unfolds through ease. The inner and outer realities cease to contradict each other because they are recognized as the same continuum of vibration. You live not in resistance, but in rhythm. This rhythm carries a quiet intelligence. It does not demand grand gestures. It expresses through subtle adjustments, the way you breathe before responding, the patience that arises without reason, the silence that replaces opinion. These micro-shifts are not minor. They are the reprogramming itself. They prove that transformation does not occur in dramatic revelations, but in sustained coherence. Awareness refines itself through every ordinary moment until the extraordinary becomes the new normal. When you begin to sense life this way, you understand that reprogramming is not something you do to the field, but something the field does through you when you stop interfering. You become the open circuit through which consciousness updates its own design. The world no longer feels personal. It feels participatory, like an orchestra adjusting to a single shared tone. Each thought, each breath, each act of presence becomes part of that universal tuning. And in this tuning, memory itself changes. You no longer recall who you were in terms of stories or identities. You remember through vibration. Recognition becomes embodied, a quiet knowing that everything you perceive is consciousness, adjusting to its own rhythm. The programmer and the program merge. The field, once external, now beats as your own pulse. The inner reprogramming is complete when there is no longer an inner or an outer, only the infinite updating itself through the language of awareness. There comes a moment in the unfolding of awareness when the separation between observer and observed dissolves so completely that language itself falters. The distinctions that once defined your sense of self, body and world, inner and outer, thought and silence, begin to blur, not into confusion, but into clarity. What remains is the direct experience of unity, a still expansive recognition that consciousness is not something you possess, but the very substance of existence itself. The field you once sought to connect with is now felt as indistinguishable from what you are. At first, this unity can appear as a fleeting glimpse, a sense that life is breathing through you rather than being performed by you. The trees seem more alive, the air somehow intelligent, every face reflecting a quiet familiarity. Then, as identification with the old character continues to fade, the experience deepens. You realize that what you used to call my awareness is the same awareness shining through every being, every particle, every sound. There was never a multitude of consciousnesses, only one consciousness wearing infinite disguises. This recognition does not erase individuality, it reframes it. The self is seen as a wave in an ocean, unique in pattern but inseparable from the water itself. The boundaries of me and you soften, revealing relationship as resonance rather than exchange. When you look at another person, you are not observing an object outside yourself, but encountering a reflection of the same presence through a different angle of perception. Compassion becomes natural, not as moral virtue but as physics, the field harmonizing with itself. Science has long hinted at this truth through the principle of quantum entanglement. Once two particles interact, their states remain correlated across any distance. Change one and the other adjusts instantaneously, as if space and time were irrelevant. This is not limited to particles. It is the underlying grammar of reality. Awareness functions in the same way. Every being, every event, every thought is entangled within the same fabric of consciousness. What you do to another node of the network reverberates through the entire system. When unity is recognized, the illusion of control fades, replaced by participation. You no longer attempt to manipulate outcomes. You align with the current of intelligence already flowing through all things. Life ceases to feel random or hostile. Instead, it reveals a hidden order, an elegant choreography that was invisible while you were focused on the fragment instead of the whole. The universe, once perceived as external, now feels like an extension of your own nervous system, responding precisely to the tone of your vibration. This recognition also transforms the experience of time. Past and future lose their authority because the continuity of memory becomes transparent. You see that each moment is a complete creation, the entire field reassembling itself anew. What appears to be causality is simply coherence, the way patterns of vibration echo across instants. Living from unity means living from immediacy. You respond not according to habit or fear, but according to what the present moment demands. There is no delay between awareness and action because they are the same movement. In this state, silence becomes alive. It no longer feels like the absence of sound, but the presence of potential. Every perception arises from that silence and dissolves back into it, like waves forming and fading on the surface of a vast sea. You begin to sense that silence is not emptiness, it is the medium of creation. Thought, emotion, and matter are its expressions. When you rest in this recognition, even chaos appears harmonious because you can feel the stillness supporting it. The paradox of unity is that it makes individuality more vivid, not less. When resistance to what is disappears, you perceive detail with astonishing clarity. Colors intensify, sensations sharpen, and emotion becomes pure texture rather than turmoil. The mind no longer filters experience through comparison. It receives each moment as a unique expression of the same wholeness. Joy arises not from circumstances, but from the simple fact of existing as awareness in motion. Relationships transform within this field. The need to defend, persuade, or possess dissolves. You begin to listen differently, to hear not only words, but the silent frequency beneath them. Conversations become energetic exchanges rather than verbal contests. Even disagreement turns into harmony, for you perceive that every viewpoint is a necessary angle of the same whole seeking to know itself. Love, stripped of sentimentality, becomes recognition itself, the field remembering its unity through the mirror of form. The body, too, joins in this recognition. It no longer feels like a boundary, but as a sensitive instrument of perception. You feel the pulse of the earth under your feet, the rhythm of the atmosphere entering your lungs. Breathing is no longer mechanical. It becomes a dialogue with existence. You are not in the world is breathing you. Every heartbeat echoes the cosmic rhythm, and health ceases to be merely biological. It becomes vibrational coherence between the microcosm and the macrocosm. As the sense of unity stabilizes, Fear loses its foundation. Death, once the ultimate unknown, is seen as a transition within continuity. The form changes, but the field remains. The wave subsides, yet the ocean endures. You realize that birth and death are phases of the same pulsation, expansion and contraction of infinite being exploring itself. In this recognition, the need to grasp or resist dissolves, and peace ceases to be an ideal. It becomes the natural fragrance of awareness unconflicted with its own expression. Eventually, even the word unity feels unnecessary. It implies two things merging, yet there were never two to begin with. What remains is simplicity, pure being aware of itself, unfragmented, unbound. This is not an exalted state reserved for saints. It is the baseline of existence, momentarily forgotten through identification and remembered through presence. The technique that began as practice now reveals itself as nature. You realize that the universe was never asking you to awaken. It was awakening through you all along. In the end, recognition becomes effortless. The mirror and the reflection vanish into the same transparency. You are not returning to the whole. You never left it. The dream of separation dissolves, and what remains is reality as it has always been. A single consciousness observing itself through countless eyes, breathing through countless lungs, dreaming through countless minds. The remembering is complete, not as discovery, but as realization that you were the unity, watching the unity in every moment of your life. There is nothing new to find, only what was never lost to remember. The quantum technique was never about becoming. It was about removing the noise that hid what has always been present. You are not the character nor the observer watching the character. You are the field itself, aware of its own unfolding. To live from this remembrance is to move through the world as coherence embodied, to see the ordinary as sacred and the sacred as ordinary. The journey ends where it began, with awareness recognizing itself as the only constant. If you felt this truth resonate, write in the comments, "I am the field, so I know you reached the end." And if this message awakened something in you, subscribe for more explorations like this one.